Hello everybody, it's Anna here, and today we are at the grave, here we are, and the childhood home of David Lloyd George, who was the only Welsh Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and he actually spoke Welsh, and there he is. A very controversial character, but I would say, and it is known that he has been one of the best Prime Ministers the United Kingdom has ever had. So come along and join us as we visit here in LLANYSTUMDWY, Criccieth, on the Llŷn Peninsula in North Wales. You're very, very welcome. There's myself at the number 10 Downing Street model door that's in the grounds of his childhood home. So you're very, very welcome. Don't forget, welcome in Welsh is Criccieth. And here we are at the grave of David Lloyd George. And this is where he specifically chose to be buried, along the banks of the Afon Dwyfor, which you can hear in the background, beneath the boulder on which he would frequently sit here to admire the beautiful view. And most Prime Ministers are laid to rest in Westminster Abbey in London, but he explained to his family that he had no wish to be buried ever in Westminster Abbey in London, but he wanted to be buried here near his childhood home where people could see his grave. And he also wanted no inscription on the grave, only the boulder that he used to sit on. So it's fascinating and beautiful. So this is now a museum, and you can learn all about the life and career of the one of the most influential statesmen of the 20th century. And David Lloyd George was not only the first working class Prime Minister, but also the first whose first language was Welsh. And this is the home that he grew up in. So we're going to be looking around while I tell you some history of Lloyd George and what he did for the United Kingdom. Winston Churchill said that Lloyd George was the greatest Welshman which that unconquerable race has produced since the age of the Tudors. And though Lloyd George was born in Manchester, his parents, called William George, who was a school teacher, and his mother, Elizabeth Lloyd, a domestic servant, moved back to Wales when Lloyd George was 4 months old, and on his father dying of pneumonia on the 7th of June 1864, his mother returned to LLANYSTUMDWY, her birthplace, and they lived here in this house with her mother and brother Richard, depending on just £50 per annum from William George's estate and on the family shoemaking business, which was maintained until 1880. And as we walk around the house and the shoemaking business workshop next door, you'll see what it would have been like back at the time that they lived here. So David Lloyd George's uncle, called Richard, who was a cobbler, like his father, was the unpaid lay pastor for the Baptist sect and was the major early influence on David. And from July 1878, David Lloyd George worked for a solicitor, qualifying as a solicitor himself 6 years later. In 1885, he set up his own practice, joined by his brother William, from mid-1887. His brother's diligence enabled Lloyd George to enter local politics, and he made his name as a solicitor, lay preacher and temperance lecturer, and he was actually active on behalf of many of the pressure groups which formed a part of Welsh liberalism. Here is the cobbler's workshop of David's uncle Richard. We found this so fascinating to see all what was in there, and it's right next door to the house that Lloyd George was brought up in. But look at it, it's fabulous. The items here and around the house and at the museum nearby really do help us to understand the way that he lived and his life really between 1863 and 1945. He was a great statesman. He introduced the People's Budget to redistribute wealth, not Welsh, among the people and eliminate poverty. You can tell I do this in one take. I just just don't have time to do anymore. But he brought in also the old age pension for the elderly. He was Prime Minister during the First World War and he gave women the vote. But he did fail to solve the problems in Ireland. And like I said before, I forgot to mention, his grave is nearby and that is a Grade 2 listed. David was one of the 20th century's most famous radicals. He was the first and only Welshman to hold the office of Prime Minister. I think I've mentioned that once before. And although born in Manchester, grew up here under the care of his uncle, the cobbler, and partly self-taught, he excelled in his studies at the village school, learning Latin and French in order to qualify for legal training. He's remembered as a man of great energy and an unconventional outlook in character and politics. In 1890, he was elected Liberal MP for Caernarfon, aged 27, and his scathing wit made him a dreaded but respected debating opponent in the House. In 1906, he was made president of the Board of Trade and became recognised as a very able politician. Herbert Henry Asquith later promoted him to Chancellor, and he became one of the great reforming chancellors of the 20th century, introducing state pensions for the first time and declaring a war on poverty. Now, to pay for wide-ranging social reforms as well as naval expansion, he intended, controversially, to tax land, and he responded to the resulting outcry with passionate condemnation of landowners and aristocrats. His reforming budget only passed after the 1911 Parliament Act greatly weakened the power of the House of Lords to block legislation from the Commons. During the war, he threw himself into the job of Minister for Munitions, organising and inspiring the war effort. He accepted an invitation to form a government in December 1916, and his dynamism made sure he was regarded as the right man to give Britain's war a much-needed boost. Yet, despite his success at centralising the government machine, the army remained beyond the reach of his reforming efforts, and with the end of the war in 1918, on Armistice Day, he declared, "This is no time for words. Our hearts are too full of gratitude to which no tongue can give adequate expression." He was acclaimed as the man who had won the war, and in 1918 the coalition won a huge majority. It was the first election in which any women were allowed to vote. And he established the League of Nations and the War Reparations Settlement. He also supported Welsh devolution and the de-establishment of the Church of England in Wales. And he also helped to establish the modern welfare state. Prime Minister Lloyd George was a great wartime leader and achieved many things in his political career. His role in the creation of the RAF, that's the Royal Air Force, which is the world's first independent air force, is a further important achievement that deserves also to be recognised. There's a photo of him. We were watching this film in the museum, and this is a reconstruction of the classroom. Look what it says: children should be seen and not heard. But we were absolutely fascinated with the life story of David Lloyd George. He has left a lasting mark on the history of Wales, of Britain and of the world. He brought Wales and Welsh interest to the national stage and became one of the most important British political leaders of the 20th century, introducing a series of social reforms from old age pensions to unemployment insurance. He modernised British finances. He harnessed British industry to the war effort during the Great War, and as Prime Minister, he pulled the country together in that great struggle and led it to victory in 1918. In the subsequent peace negotiations, He was one of the big three who shaped the map of the world. He was a brilliant man. He remains the only Welsh-speaking Welshman ever to have become Prime Minister, and also the only solicitor ever have to become Prime Minister, and he remains the only individual from an impoverished working class background, you've seen his house, who had no formal education beyond the village school to become Prime Minister. His is a unique story in Welsh and British history. So I hope you've enjoyed this look around the home of, well, the childhood home of David Lloyd George, Welsh Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1916 to 1922. And I think we'll leave it there today. There's the graveside of David Lloyd George. We'll leave it there from LLANYSTUMDWY in Criccieth in North Wales. And we'll say ta-ta for now, and we'll see you on the next adventure, or the next Welsh lesson, or the next Welsh history lesson. Don't forget to keep practicing your Welsh, as I say every time, because practice makes perfect. Ta-ta for now, nos da.